And hello to everyone. Welcome to the ninth annual Shkreli Awards. My name is Vikas Sani, and I'm president of the Lown Institute. The Lown Institute, for those of you who don't know, is an independent think tank advocating bold ideas for a just and caring system of health. We envision a system focused on what's best for people, like hospitals caring for those most in need, patients living without fear of financial ruin, and health professionals actually finding satisfaction and joy in their work. Our signature project, the Lown Hospital's Index of Social Responsibility, is the first hospital ranking to include measures never before used like CEO pay, community investment, and avoidance of medical overuse. You can see more about the index and all of our other innovative work at lownhospitalsindex.org. So, if this is your first time at the Shkreli Awards, welcome. This is our annual top 10 list of the most egregious examples of profiteering or dysfunction in healthcare, named after the notorious pharma bro, Martin Shkreli. We track these shocking stories throughout the year, including through nominations from our own Lown Weekly readers. And then we ask an esteemed panel of clinicians, activists, researchers, journalists, and others to vote for the winners. So, presenting these stories at the end of the year really reveals a healthcare system that's in desperate need of transformation. What makes many of these stories so disturbing is that the bad behavior that they engage in, like Martin Shkreli's infamous price hike, is often perfectly legal. So our system is structured to reward and incentivize such behavior. After nearly a decade of documenting dysfunction through the Shkreli Awards, one thing is clear. The current dissatisfaction with healthcare is the result of decades of systemic problems. Now, the good news is that there is a consensus building that the system is broken and needs change. As they say, the first step to a solution is admitting you have a problem. So that's where we are, and that's what we're going to be doing today. But before we announce the winners, let's bring on our guests to help with the countdown. So Dr. Bayo Curry-Winchell is a family medicine physician, nationally recognized health advocate, and medical director at St. Mary's Health Network in Reno, Nevada. She connects patients to empathetic providers through her Clinicians Who Care project and Beyond Clinical Walls podcast. Her TEDx talk has received over 2 million views for its discussion on the U.S. maternal health crisis. Dr. Bayo, can you briefly tell us about Clinicians Who Care?
Yes, I can. Thank you for having me. It is a pleasure and a joy just to be here with everyone. Clinicians Who Care is a free database inspired by my own medical story of dismissal. It is a resource that connects people with doctors who've been shown to listen, care, and believe their patients. So it is a resource that has every specialty in medicine. We have orthopedics, cardiology, everything. And you, as a patient, as we all are, can go into this database and you can write down the name of a doctor who made a difference in your life and share that, because when you do that, it allows someone else to have the information before they go and see this doctor. So it is worldwide. It has over 2,000 names in its short launch, and it's helping people everywhere. And it's been such a joy to hear the stories come in of how this free resource is making a huge impact.
That's terrific. Thanks. Dr. Lown always used to say the art of being a clinician is the art of listening.
Yes, it is the
Um,
number one
so
thing.
with us today also is absolutely. With us today also is Eli Rushbanks, who is General Counsel and Director of Policy and Advocacy for the nonprofit Dollar Four, FOR, Dollar Four, where he's helped the organization relieve over $80 million in medical debt for over 30,000 people. His policy work has been cited in national media, including the New York Times, and it focuses on improving patient access to hospital financial assistance. Eli, can you tell us about $4 and how it works?
Yeah, happy to. I'm happy to be here. I think somebody made a mistake in scheduling me with Dr. Bio. She's far more important and accomplished than I am, but I'll do my best. Dollar Four is a nonprofit patient advocacy that helps patients with hospital financial assistance applications. Any patient can go to our website, see what discount they would be eligible for off of their bill at their hospital, and then our patient advocates will advocate for them and help them actually get that discount.
Yeah, I've seen some of those stories and they're actually phenomenal. A really important service. Unfortunate that we need it actually in this country.
We're
That's a
doing policy work as well to try to put ourselves out of business.
Yeah, I think that's the key. Lown would love to put itself out of business too if we had the healthcare system we all want and need. So, to the Shkreli Awards, high quality investigative journalism is harder and harder to come by these days. And that's why we also honor the journalists who are behind the stories with what we call the Shkreli Reporting Award. On screen, you can see what the award looks like. It's a miniature figurine or bobblehead of Shkreli himself holding wads of cash in each hand. You'll see the names of the journalists as we go through the award winners this year, so please do give them a round of applause at home. We couldn't do this without them. And one last thing, some of the stories we're about to share have some pretty awful details, and some audience members may really find that upsetting, so just be advised. So, without further ado, let's do the countdown of the 2025 Shkreli Awards. Brenna, take it away.
Number 10, premature procurement practices put organ donors in peril. The nation's transplant system is supposed to honor the last wishes of patients and save lives. Instead, a New York Times investigation shows that a growing number of patients have been pushed towards organ retrieval while they're still alive or showing clear signs of consciousness. As federal pressure mounts on organ procurement organizations to increase transplant numbers, the line between end-of-life care and organ harvesting is becoming increasingly blurred. Central to this issue is the rise in donation after circulatory death. Patients are on life support, usually in a coma, and unlike brain-dead patients, have a remote chance of regaining consciousness. Once families agree to take their loved one off life support and circulatory death is declared, harvesting can begin. In New Mexico, a woman being prepped for donation ended up regaining consciousness. In Kentucky, a man pulled his knees to his chest and shook his head. And in Alabama, Misty Hawkins was cut open only for surgeons to discover that her heart was still beating, so they sewed her back up again. Donation after circulatory death used to be widely forbidden. Now it accounts for nearly 1/3 of all organ donations.
Okay, Dr. Bio, what do you
So
think?
there are so many things that went wrong with this case. And the first thing that I go to is the do no harm. And that is what the system is set up for. And that's why we have different protocols set in place. But when you look at how many things that had to have been passed for this to happen to these people across the world, we have instilled these protocols, but the protocols don't have any sort of substance behind it. Because when you have a patient who has already made it to the operating room, and for you to operate and see a heart beating, there are so many things that should have happened prior. So this is a mishap on all levels, and it should remind us to take a step back at whatever we have implemented and realize it is not working at all.
Thanks. Uh, Eli, anything you want to say on this? I have a few comments. You're on. Sorry, you should unmute yourself.
I will only make that mistake once. The reaction of the association to this felt a little crazy. The fact that this could happen one time is, I think, like shocking to the average person. They were acting like this is a sort of these are edge cases. This is bound to happen. There's going to be mistakes. And I'm like, no, there shouldn't be mistakes like this.
Yeah. So I have a slightly different take following sense. This one, and there's a few other winners list. I think describe correct or well-meaning in a certain sense. And let me tell you what I mean. In CCU settings, I've seen weeks, if not months, with zero hope. And the brain may not be dead, but there's a real question of what do you do? And so I kind of get that there would be this question of, well, if at some point a decision is going to be made, why not make the best of a horrible situation? And me, but to your point, Dr. Bio, implementation is everything. I mean, whatever it is we want or intend to do. And so I think that's the only comment I have. I'm seeing in the chat people are having trouble hearing me, so let me adjust my mic. Uh, Let me just check my inputs. Anyway, let's move on. Uh, Heads up, folks, the next one is pretty dark and complicated. So, Brenna?
Number 9, hyperbaric hustle leads to horrific mishap and murder charges. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy delivers 100% oxygen to a patient inside a pressurized chamber to remedy carbon monoxide poisoning and decompression sickness. The Oxford Center, an alternative medicine facility in Troy, Michigan, however, uses this technology for dozens of unapproved conditions like Alzheimer's disease, autism, and dyslexia. Or, in the case of patient Thomas Cooper, age 5, ADHD and sleep apnea. According to the Michigan Attorney General, Oxford ran its chambers far beyond their service life, skipping basic safety checks and inspections. They also found that no doctor or licensed technician was on site when a tragic malfunction during Thomas's treatment led to him becoming engulfed in flames, killing him in seconds. An investigation revealed that a grounding strap, a basic but critical tool to prevent static electricity, had not been used. 4 people were arrested. 3 were charged with second-degree murder, and another was charged with involuntary manslaughter. All of them pleaded not guilty. According to testimony, the grounding straps were eventually located by police. Staff had stored them in a quote-unquote junk drawer.
Okay. Can everybody hear me a little better? Yeah, I'm getting nods. Good. Okay. It was just the microphone inputs. Silly me. Well, so this one, I don't know where to begin. Let me start by saying this. You know, conventionally trained cardiologist, allopathic tradition, uh, in my own practice, in my group, I was always seen as the one most sympathetic to alternative medicine. I have been known to take supplements, I will confess. I have long COVID. There's no good answers. People are desperate. You want to look for things and you try things. So let honestly, despite mainstream doctors turn to medicine, we got to have some minimals to people. I mean, and that's true for the supplement industry where things are touted, unregulated claims are made, and people can just go to town. And this is absolutely the same thing. Um, Hyperbaric oxygen therapy, might be particularly good if you're trying to get oxygenated tissue and save an amputation. Whatever it is that, makes that kind of sense, hard to argue. This, on the other hand, is pure snake oil. Where's the evidence? And, after we actually went with this story and the judges voted, there was just a recent article in the Guardian newspaper with a lot more detail. And one of the things that it underscored is that the sort of movement for alternative, make America healthy again, mainstreaming more alternative ways of thinking about things has embraced hyperbaric oxygen. So let me say, if we're talking regenerative agriculture, if we're talking about getting rid of pesticides, if we're talking about getting rid of all these food dyes, count me in. I'm there. But for something like this, for people to start claiming it makes you live longer, it extends your lifespan according to Dr. Oz on the Oprah show, and others who talk about it promoting a longer and more vibrant life, show me the data. But before you make those claims, you have that data. What this shows is the alternative movement needs regulatory and evidence scrutiny as much as anybody else. So that's what I got. Anybody else want to say something?
I'll jump in. There's a big difference between let's uncouple public health and wellness. And to your point, there's this big movement into living healthy. And I'm one who embraces alternative as well. But let's do it in the safe manner. And what has happened, unfortunately, is a slew of misinformation. For example, there are treatments that have been proven to help with hyperbaric for wounds. But when it is used in a way to help a diagnosis like ADHD, and there isn't that proven data, that can cause harm. And so being mindful that the wellness industry, a lot of the supplements, there's no regulation, there's no oversight to those industries. And when that happens, it can cost a life. And I am so sad to hear this little boy's life, was lost because of regulatory pieces and misinformation feeding at the souls of these parents trying to just get help. So this is an opportunity for us to do better and do it in a way that will help propel true health into healthcare.
Well put, Dr. Bio. And I don't think it helps that we have a kind of influencer economy developing around all this stuff to the point where Justin Bieber or LeBron James are all touting this online. So let's move on. Brenna, what's number 8?
Number 8, United Health Nursing Home scheme allegedly leaves seniors stranded in emergencies. According to an investigation by The Guardian, United Health Group, the nation's largest healthcare conglomerate, created a financial incentive system across nearly 2,000 nursing homes that rewarded facilities for keeping sick residents out of the hospital, even during clear medical emergencies. Teams of United Health employees were even stationed in some nursing homes where whistleblowers say they were able to influence care decisions. The Guardian reported that one man experiencing a stroke now lives with permanent brain damage after his hospitalization was postponed. Staff also reported being encouraged to talk to residents about changing their code status to do not resuscitate, a move that would reduce expensive end-of-life care. In response to the article, United Health said that the suggestion that its employees have prevented hospital transfers is, quote, verifiably false, and that the article misrepresents a program that, quote, improves health outcomes for seniors through on-site clinical care. The company has filed a defamation lawsuit against The Guardian.
Okay, so this one clearly is going to be in the courts for some time, and it'll be interesting to see what the outcome is. Eli, you want to comment?
What jumped out to me was United Health's defense that was quoted in the article was that they were preventing costly and dangerous hospital visits for these seniors. And the human in me was kind of disgusted at their argument that people needing to go to the emergency room would be a dangerous like act for them. The lawyer in me was like borderline impressed with what it takes to say that with a straight face to a journalist as an actual justification for this.
Indeed. Um, Dr. Bio, you want to say something?
This one, hits home as a person who had a father who sometimes had to go into skilled rehab facilities after a stroke. And to think that if he was having a stroke, any sort of symptoms that does require a higher level of care, that he would be deterred from that. I think we all need to think of our humanity and how do we do that in this current landscape is remember that you could have a grandpa, an aunt, a grandmother, somebody who will be in one of these facilities. And how would you want their care to be handled in that situation? And so that kind of lifts the veil of all of these necessities or protocols that are being shared as a helpful situation. Because in the end, if it prevents them from getting to care like the emergency room, which is where they need to be, we are missing the mark on helping people overall, like be able to get the care that they need.
Indeed. Well, to me, this is kind of another example of the issue being as much implementation, who's doing it and for what reason and to what end. So again, let me, I hate to keep dropping these, but many's the time where you're at the receiving end and a nursing home sends you somebody who clearly is or should have had their code status reviewed, who really doesn't belong there. And in many cases, it's kind of dumping to say, we don't want it on our watch. So I get the impulse to want to rationalize decision making and even try to be clear on code status and all the other elements that go into care in these settings. Question is, what is an insurance company doing that sort of thing? Like, what kind of a system do we have where that's possible, allowed, or for that matter, necessary? It really should be clinical decision making by clinicians, patients, and families, and that's not there. So there's a lot to figure out to solve some of these problems. This clearly was not the way. So number 7, Brenna.
Number 7, hospitals' loyalty to lucrative surgeon leaves women with lifelong trauma. According to the Washington Post, Chesapeake Regional Healthcare in Virginia is accused of enabling obstetrician-gynecologist Javid Perwaiz as he carried out needless, invasive surgeries that left some patients scarred, traumatized, or unable to have children. While Parway's falsified charts pushed women into the operating room with false cancer diagnoses, induced births without cause, and violated consent rules for sterilization, the hospital billed patients for $18.5 million. Parwayz has been convicted for his crimes and is serving a 59-year sentence, but now federal prosecutors are after the hospital for its role. Leaders are accused of ignoring warnings about Parwayz, punishing whistleblowers, and repeatedly renewing his privileges despite sloppy records and fraudulent billing. It's not like there weren't red flags from the very beginning. In the 1980s, before joining Chesapeake, Parwayz was barred from operating at another hospital for performing unnecessary hysterectomies on about a dozen patients. And in 1995, he was convicted in a tax fraud case for claiming a Ferrari as a business expense, among other charges. As of September 2025, the federal case is ongoing, and a website has been set up to help identify potential victims. Chesapeake Regional Medical Center has pleaded not guilty and filed a motion to dismiss.
All right. Well, I'm not going to comment on this, a member of my own tribe, as it were. Eli, you're a lawyer. Tell us
I'll
what you
throw
think.
anybody under the bus. I'll comment on this. I started my career as a public defender, and there were constantly stories of cops with histories of abusive behavior getting put on leave or terminated, and then just bouncing from department to department and never really getting washed out of the profession. And this story just felt like that. There were a couple stories that kind of came up that felt like that. I don't really know what the cause is. I can't imagine in healthcare that this is the norm, like it might be in the criminal justice system. But it felt like this was a disturbing trend that looked a lot like that.
Yeah. Well, it isn't the norm. I think I can say that pretty confidently. But like so many other issues like this, as we try to address, dysfunction and find fixes, even though it's not the norm, it is often enough, and that there is a significant, sizable uh, group that you could call them outliers, but we need solutions. So, Dr. Bio, I'm just curious, amongst physicians, once we graduate, sort of an honor system. There's some scrutiny, but not a lot. Uh, Medical registration boards are notably reluctant to really crack down. And sometimes it's because, they could make a mistake and do something very unjust. But clearly, uh, we need a better way. And I'm not sure, I don't pretend to have the answer, but I'm curious what you think. How do we clinicians monitor our own? Or should we be the ones?
We should be. We should be monitoring, and there is a lot of work behind societies and things that we have to renew our medical license. There's a lot of bureaucracy that is a part of our system, but where that work and the funds should go to is policing ourselves, because you graduate from medical school, all of a sudden you have this white coat. There's this kind of, okay, well, go out into the world and do good things. Well, as we see in this case, not everybody does that. And we have to be able to identify those outliers that are not doing the right thing by their patients. The other thing I wanted to mention, I love how Eli mentioned, when it comes to this has happened with police officers and the behaviors kind of just, you put them in a different department, but of course that pattern is still there. That led me to think of, there is a power dynamic that happens between patients and doctors when they're in the exam room. And even if you are the kindest, the most empathetic doctor, when you walk into that room, you have a patient who could be the most educated, well-traveled, but all of a sudden they feel powerless because you're the one that's holding this information. And I bridge that with this case. You have a doctor who is telling women that you need to have this procedure, you need to have this, and a patient is automatically thinking, well, he's the doctor, I need to go with that. So the solution is, number one, helping patients as well advocate for themselves and know that they have the right to stand up when they feel and know something isn't right. So we have to come at it from a two-party system. We've got to fix the bureaucracy of the funds that are going in the wrong direction. And then we also need to help patients know that this is unacceptable and have the language to stand up.
Yep. We're kind of running behind on time, as always happens. There's a question from the audience. I'm just going to put it out there. I don't think we actually have time to address it, but it is critical. And that is, and I think about this a lot in relationship to other policy items and issues like inappropriate care, low value care, stuff that's perfectly legal and perfectly kind of acceptable and within a certain norm, but really is suboptimal care. More broadly, the quality question, and that is, what's the role of other doctors? What's the role of peers? How do, if it comes to people's attention, what do they do? There are very few kind of well-trod mechanisms other than very sort of intrusive or uncomfortable ones. And maybe that's part of what we need to figure out, right? How to make it easy and less onerous, make it routine is something we always do with ourselves and each other. So anyway, we got to keep going. Number 6, Brenna.
Number 6, hospital denies family life support decisions amid Georgia personhood politics. Adriana Smith, a 30-year-old Atlanta nurse, pictured here with her older son, was 9 weeks pregnant when she was rushed to Emory University Hospital Midtown with complications. Doctors found multiple blood clots in her head and were unable to act in time to save her. Instead of allowing her family to make end-of-life decisions, the hospital moved to keep her body on life support even though she was brain dead. They believe the state's personhood law, which grants a fetus the full rights of a person if it has a detectable heartbeat, required them to keep her body functioning until the fetus became viable. 4 months later, the baby was removed by emergency C-section and survived. Smith died 4 days later when she was taken off life support. Georgia politicians argued over whether the law required this to happen, with the bill's author insisting that doctors were, quote, appropriately maintaining life support for the sake of the fetus, and the state's attorney general claiming nothing in the statute mandated such an outcome. As of October, Adriana's son Chance was still in the NICU due to his underdeveloped lungs, according to a post from the family's GoFundMe page.
Dr. Bio?
This story, and I saw it pop up in the comments, and I want to honor this hits home as not only a mom, but also a Black mom and as a doctor. So there's three different identities that I feel by listening to this story. And it's unfortunate that politics played a role in the wishes of what someone would like to have for their care. We live in a land of freedom, and that freedom is to make the choices that are important to us. And when you read the history of how her mom shared these would not have been the wishes of her daughter, where do we go if we are no longer allowed to have autonomy over our own health and our own choices for our own body? So there's a lot at play here, but the one thing to remember is this is a life. These are choices that politics have decided versus health and decision making. And when we do that, we lose sight of a person's personal beliefs. And I also want to highlight this family is strapped with medical debt. Let's not forget that. And we can advocate for change, but who's going to be there in the undercurrent to help this family as they have the challenges of her cost of care, of the baby's cost of care? So there's a lot here to unravel, but the main point is this is a person that lost the choice to choose what she wanted to do. And when that happened, we know in our system it's supposed to go to the next of kin. And her mom didn't have that choice.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this is incredibly heartbreaking and kind of horrifying. I kind of get everything revolves around whether or not you believe that a 9-week fetus with a beating heart is a person. So, that it's kind of, to me, that's a whole other debate. We don't have time for it here, but it's obvious that that's what drove this, and that's kind of a terrible place to be for the family. It's just awful. Anyway, this is pretty heavy. Let's take a pause while I tell you all about something a little bit more uplifting, I hope. The Lown Institute created the Bernard Lown Award for Social Responsibility to honor an outstanding young clinician each year who's dedicated their time, energy, skills to tackle the most important issues of our time. Health related, sometimes tangentially, sometimes directly. If you know of a clinician under 45 in the United States who stands out for their bold leadership in healthcare reform, environmental justice, equity, or any humanitarian efforts, you can nominate them for the Bernard Lown Award, which comes with a $25,000 prize. The picture you see here on your screen is of our most recent winner, Dr. Reshma Ramachandran, who's now at Yale, an indefatigable champion of equitable access to medicines and a consistent challenger of pharmaceutical industry influence. So nominations close in January 15th, so please submit yours soon. And make sure you save the date for our BLASR, Bernard Lown Award for Social Responsibility, our BLASR Award dinner, which will be on May 21st, 2026, right here in Boston. So back to the Shkrelis. Brenna, number 5.
Number 5, lack of oversight allows alleged physician predator to commit years of abuse. A rheumatologist in Massachusetts allegedly spent more than a decade exploiting his stature to sexually abuse patients while the institutions around him looked the other way. Nearly 250 former patients say Dr. Derek Todd used his authority to perform invasive breast and pelvic procedures that had no clinical justification, often isolating patients in empty offices, ignoring their discomfort, and dismissing their protests with medical pretexts. Many of the offenses occurred at Brigham and Women's, a Harvard-affiliated teaching hospital. A Boston Globe Spotlight investigation shows that Todd was shielded by a cascade of failures at every level. Complaints were whispered to colleagues, supervisors, and primary care doctors for years, but fizzled in the very bureaucracies meant to protect patients. Even after physicians outside the Brigham reported disturbing allegations, Todd was allowed to keep seeing patients for months and perform exams that he had been told to stop doing. Todd has signed a voluntary agreement with the state's medical board to cease practicing and is no longer employed by Brigham and Women's or any medical facility. In addition to hundreds of civil cases that have been consolidated into one master complaint, Todd faces 2 criminal rape charges to which he has pleaded not guilty.
Dr. Bio, here's another fellow physician.
It is. And I want to start with if a man would have had, let's say, a man going into the doctor, and all of a sudden that doctor was doing surprise anal exams, that would have been stopped in 10 minutes, not 10 years. So I use that as an example of who has historically had this level of abuse, and not discounting that it hasn't happened with men. So I want to honor that as well. But when we see this constant pattern or narrative of women getting taken advantage of in the most intimate ways, and you compare that, if that would have happened to a man, it would have been stopped. So this goes back to the other one that we were talking about, as not only from a physician standing point, standing up and saying when you hear these whispers, but then also helping the patients. And I also want to say one more thing that came to mind. We are trained as doctors to report abuse. If we see any sort of elder abuse, if we see pediatric abuse, we should have that same system if we see that happening from a colleague doing that to a patient.
Yeah, well, it is very much like that, the prior case we talked about. And I often ask myself when we review these cases, like, who's actually getting the award here? And in many ways, I don't think the story is about Dr. Todd. In many ways, I think the story is about the system. And as you point out, the fact that, whatever were these kind of whispers or intimations, it just goes on for so long. We clearly need a better way of evaluating these things. And I think, there's a deeper theme here for hospitals as hospitals increasingly employ more physicians, and employed physicians are the majority now of practicing physicians. I just think these aspects of things are something that the employers are going to have to be much more proactive about. So let's keep going. Number 4.
Number 4, billion-dollar Band-Aids are a bonanza for Medicare billers. Despite limited research showing they outperform traditional bandages, more than 100 new, quote, skin substitute wound care products, usually made from pieces of dried placenta, have come to market recently. Why? The answer may lie with a loophole in Medicare pricing rules. Unlike private insurers, who don't pay for skin substitutes at all due to lack of evidence, Medicare reimburses for these products for the first 6 months on the market at whatever price the company chooses. Some companies have set prices for skin substitutes at thousands of dollars per square inch, offering bulk discounts to doctors who bill Medicare the full sticker price and pocket the spread. According to a New York Times investigation, the average cost of 1 inch square of skin substitute in April 2025 was $5,948. Spending on these bandages exploded to more than $10 billion in 2024, surpassing what Medicare pays for anesthesia or CT scans. Some cases border on the absurd. $14 million in bandages applied to a single Nevada patient, $6 million on another whose wound never healed, and one Texas man who received $1.3 million worth of bandages despite having no wound at all. Meanwhile, patients harmed by sloppy and indiscriminate application have landed in the hospital with infections, sepsis, amputations, and in at least one case, death. Government officials appear to finally be catching up. New rules from CMS go into effect in 2026 that change how skin substitutes are priced. The agency claims that Medicare spending on these products will be reduced by nearly 90%.
Eli?
Feels weird to say that I had a favorite story of this like parade of horribles, but this one probably was because this is a true Shkreli Award. It's not even clear that the conduct in a lot of these instances was unlawful. It was immoral and unethical and extremely problematic. But there was one of the statements by the company, I think I wrote it down. It says legacies following the law, not taking advantage of the system. That was their defense. And it's like the whole point of this and a Shkreli Award that we're pointing out here is you can do both. You can be compliant and you can be taking advantage of the system in a way that's really gross. So this was the one that to me exemplified that point the most.
Dr. Bio?
Yeah, you can live in both parties. You can be following the law, but doing something terrible. And so then I go back to, because one of the patients are in my home state, Nevada. I'm like, so don't come to my state anymore to gamble because you can just create your own loophole and you can retire before even the age of 65 for Medicare. So there's a lot of things that are wrong with this system because of this notion that if it's allowed, then I'm just going to do it. And that that is a backwards way of thinking when we talk about a person's health. So there's a lot of things wrong. One person in my home state, and I'm glad, as Eli mentioned, this one stood out as well.
All right. Well, I can just remind us all, if I have to put words in his mouth, I mean, I think Martin Shkreli's credo really is profiteering is a moral imperative. And so I think we can draw the line on that one. Number three.
Number 3, FDA approves lab-grown arteries despite evidence of life-threatening leaks. According to the New York Times, biotech company Humacyte promoted its lab-grown blood vessel as a breakthrough for wounded patients when pitching investors, but its research didn't hold up to scrutiny. At the FDA, scientists saw questionable data, failed safety checks, and vessels that could rupture without warning. Deaths, amputations, and even a missing patient had been included as evidence for success. Yet at the end of the day, FDA leaders approved the product anyway. Agency staff vocalized their dissent, and one even resigned in protest, calling the risk to patients unacceptable, especially since better performing options already exist. The vessels are marketed by Humacyte for nearly $30,000 each and come with a black box warning that states, quote, failure can result in life-threatening hemorrhage, unquote. The company is targeting sales to hospitals and the US military as a treatment for soldiers injured on the battlefield. In response to the Times article, Humacyte's CEO published a statement defending the safety and effectiveness of the product.
Yeah, so let me just take this one. Let me just preface this by saying, I'm one of when I was 8 and 10 years old, I was one of those science nerds who just, was reading all the time and loved it. And to this day, I'm a technological optimist. I mean, I think amazing things are around the corner. I think in biology, amazing things are possible. This could well be one of them. I mean, I don't know. I haven't studied in detail the technology and the science. But the one thing that seems to elude everybody, entrepreneurs and others, is just because you're halfway there or even 80% of the way there, it doesn't mean you're ready to market and make coin. Seems to be that's what everybody wants to do. Uh, the problem is when you're doing healthcare and medicine, once you've got FDA approval, you're on the market. Um, it can be used much more widely than the indications, and that's actually the business strategy much of the time. And so, what it might be a very tiny failure rate in a study of 100 or 1,000 people, when you multiply by millions, becomes serious. So I don't even want to get into the FDA and how they approve this and who is involved because situation at the FDA has been really problematic, actually long before the current administration, where there's a lot of turmoil, even before that. And so I'll just stop there. And I see we're really quite behind. So let's just keep going. Here's another one, Brenna.
Number two, private equity play on clinical trials may be putting patients at risk. Institutional review boards, IRBs, are meant to be a backstop against potentially unethical clinical trials, reviewing protocols to ensure that patient subjects are not exposed to undue risks or threats to their human rights. However, private equity firms with connections to drug companies are increasingly buying IRBs along with the companies that design and run the trials, according to the New York Times. For example, when Novo Nordisk needed an ethics review for a new Ozempic spin-off trials, it didn't have to look far. It hired WCG Clinical, an IRB partly owned by Novo's own parent company. Since that investment, WCG has been picked at least 46 times to review Novo trials. WCG and its main rival, Advara, now dominate the for-profit ethics board industry and have turned it into a one-stop shop for drug makers. They do not just judge the trials. They also sell services to design the trials, find patients, manage sites, monitor data, and advise sponsors. At WCG, more money now comes from helping drug companies run studies than from safeguarding the people in them. Ethicists and watchdogs warn that patient safety could be compromised by these apparent conflicts of interest. Federal oversight is thin, board deliberations are hidden, and there's no practical way for the public to confirm whether trials were actually handled properly. Both Advara and WCG declined interview requests from the Times, but Advara did issue a statement saying it, quote, maintains strong safeguards and internal policies to ensure the independence of its institutional review board, end quote.
Yeah. So this was an interesting one. This was off my radar until we got this, into the Shkreli nominees. Um, the the origin of IRBs really is in sort of central to the sort of humane and ethical practice of research. It emerged out of World War II initially, and the Nazi experimentation on humans. And then it was refined further with the Helsinki Accords that sort of defined certain human rights across the European continent and really in some ways the world. So that's what these things are. The other thing I'll point out about this Shkreli is there's actually no alleged wrongdoing here. There's actually no particular incident or episode of malfeasance. What this is a deep worry about what could happen or what might be about to happen. So, the audience can judge for themselves how worthy this is as a Shkreli. I think that fundamentally the reason the worry is there is because uh, private equity, wherever it goes and whatever it touches, seems to spin gold for some people, but dreck for everybody else. And so I think it's perfectly reasonable to be worried, and particularly reasonable when it comes to very subtle shadings of things that are very hard to detect, especially when millions, if not billions of dollars of device and particularly pharma money are involved. So I think this is a deserving Shkreli Award, but let's open it up. Anybody else? Dr. Bio, Eli?
I heard Brenna say the phrase for-profit ethics board industry, and I just with stuff like that, I think like we as America have just lost the plot line. I don't know how you have for-profit ethics compliance. That those two things are fundamentally like lawful obligation to maximize shareholder value with ethics, which is a separate obligation that lives entirely outside of profitability. This whole structure is insane to me. And it's not this is the only industry we do it in, but it doesn't make any sense. I blame Reagan.
Well, again, to play devil's advocate, I'd say, well, there are people and views that would say they're not entire, that Venn diagram does have an intersection set. There is a place you can be, seeking profit and even maximizing profit, but doing so in a manner that's ethical. Uh, I don't know. What do you think of that, Eli? Is that just not true or
In
hard?
in the area where those two incentives align, I guess sure, but I don't think I think it's really hard to keep the incentives of profit motivation, which is a legal obligation of an operator of a business. You have to maximize the return for your shareholder and this separate ethical obligation. I guess maybe with entity structures like B corporations or something, it's way too nerdy for this context. Like maybe it theoretically could be done, but I just see two diverging number one goals. Like your primary you can't have two prime directives. And that's what this type of structure seems to necessitate.
Yep. Well, the other thing I would point out regarding that sort of hypothetical version I gave you is that um, why do we call private equity private? Well, really, it's in contrast to public equity or publicly owned or traded equity. And the key thing here, I think, for everyone to understand is that coming out of the Great Depression, the SEC, given what happened in the crash of 29, the SEC and all these regulatory institutions were established to make sure that the publicly traded markets had some transparency, some scrutiny, some degree of regulatory oversight. Private equity is by definition trying to sidestep all of that. And that, I think, in conjunction with what you've said, Eli, is why this deserves to be where it is. Um, but let's go to the very last one, the number one this year.
Number one, Kennedy's clumsy crusade against acetaminophen. U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy told Congress, quote, "I don't think people should be taking advice, medical advice, from me," unquote. Yet in the 10 months since he took the HHS wheel, he hasn't been shy about making claims and taking actions that have potentially far-reaching consequences on Americans. Exhibit A, his focus on autism. At an April cabinet meeting, he announced that the cause of the, quote, autism epidemic, unquote, would be revealed by the fall, and that he'd launched a massive research effort that would involve hundreds of scientists from around the world. Then, at a September press conference billed by President Trump as, quote, "one of the biggest announcements, really, medically, I think, in the history of our country," unquote, Kennedy followed through. Citing studies that showed correlation but no causal evidence, and despite clinicians, toxicologists, and major medical organizations having looked at the research and rejected the claim, he asserted a link between acetaminophen use and pregnancy and autism. The link was described as so significant that a safety label change was warranted and a nationwide public service campaign would be launched. A few weeks later, Kennedy expanded the theory to suggest that infants undergoing circumcision have double the rates of autism because they likely receive acetaminophen as a pain reliever. The evidence he cited was a preprint, unreviewed, unpublished, and unsupported by the broader literature. By late October, the highest health official in the land had walked much of this back, admitting the association was suggestive, not causative. While this spectacle of erratic scientific leadership around autism is supposedly tied to making America healthy again, many are now asking not what Kennedy can do for his country, but how his country can undo what he has already done.
Dr. Bio?
So I'm going to start with the word spectacle. You have a man who has said, please do not take any medical advice from me at all. I should not even be a part of the conversation, has now disrupted our entire healthcare system. Before we would look at risk factors such as smoking, lifestyle choices, or even let's just look at our overall world of war, all the things that we should be focused on. But now we are focused on if you took Tylenol, and you had a circumcision, you could have autism. And there is no link to this, but there is a link to women who have now they're in a level of confusion when they're trying to give life into the world, which spills over to complications, such as if you have a fever, you may not take Tylenol, which could lead to complications to your baby. So we have a man who has shared that he should not be giving any medical advice has now changed the entire healthcare arena in our world. And it's baffling to me that this has been accepted and that this is considered a movement towards a healthier world when we are going to be causing harm to those who are trying to bring a baby into this world. And it's just mind-blowing to me.
Eli, you want to add anything?
I don't think I have anything better than that. That nails it.
Yeah.
It's politics over medicine is what it really, this whole thing feels like. Didn't he announce that in April that he'd find the reason for autism by September, and then it just so happens they made this announcement in September. It just all of it feels very political. It's theater.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I find myself kind of wincing for the quality of leadership here. Um, Look, you know, drawing inferences around what's causing what, especially in multifactorial things and complicated things, is really difficult. And I get that people will make mistakes, and I get that sometimes we'll all go down a path and, a decade or two later say, hey, that was stupid. Why do we think that? So I get that that's part of what we do in medicine and healthcare. And for the general public, it can be very frustrating to have these views. And probably the easiest one to mock is a lot of the nutritional advice where, there's been all this back and forth. So given all of that, um, I think it behooves our leaders to be careful and judicious. And the thing that's most painful to me about this is just, if you're out of your depth, just, keep quiet. Um, and it's better to do that, I think, than say stuff that is demonstrably, I mean, it's just sort of amateur hour, and that's very painful. I mean, it brings me no pleasure to say that. So anyway, those are our awards for this year. So you can read more about all the Shkreli winners and see the fantastic reporting that uncovered these stories at lowninstitute.org. A big thank you to our guests, Dr. Bio Curry Winchell and Eli Rushbanks, and to all our judges who voted this year. You can go to our webpage and you can see the full list of judges and all of their snarky comments on these stories. You can check out Dr. Bio's patient advocacy work at clinicianswhocare.com, her podcast Beyond Clinical Walls, and her TED Talk, which is available on YouTube. And Eli and his team's work, which is amazing and good, work is at $4, $4, $4.org. And subscribe to our newsletters and follow us on social media. See you next time, and happy holidays to everyone.